presentation of Toledo Stories is made possible in part by Key Bank, celebrating the strength of our region's history and supporting the promise of its future. Key Bank, achieve anything.
The only enjoyment or pleasure in life is in the service of giving, whether material, spiritual, or in any other way. Whatever I have done is because of that feeling. Edward Drummond Libby was no ordinary man. Most people in our community knew him as a businessman or as a patron of the arts. But few people alive today know who he really was. He was born on April 17, 1854, the only son of William Langdon Libby, owner of the New England Glass Works. At 19, Edward declined an application to Harvard, preferring instead to enter the family business. His father reluctantly agreed, but assigned Edward to the lowest positions in his firm in the hope that he would prefer college to the dirty work of a glass factory. Instead of being dissuaded, Edward learned the glass business from the bottom up. When older and more experienced men said it couldn't be done, he showed his genius for promotion. He convinced Tiffany's in New York to buy the company's entire inventory of Amberina art glass, an item languishing in his father's warehouse until then. 30 years later, Amberina was still selling well. E.D. Libby established its selling power in part by his original promotion. When he was 29, his father died, and the business became his responsibility. The company, though well established and respected, was in poor financial shape. Fuel was very expensive in Massachusetts. In 1886 and 87, labor unrest grew. There was a series of strikes. Libby wanted to come west, where fuel was cheap and raw materials were abundant. Toledo, anxious to have him locate here, welcomed him with open arms in 1888. A brass band played at the station for the many Boston glassworkers who came with him. The mayor and welcoming committee were there to greet him. The newspapers printed articles praising this up-and-coming young man of business. Toledo gave him a free plot of land on which to build his factory. Some say, though, it was really Florence Scott who attracted him to Toledo. While in a local office deciding whether or not to locate here, Libby saw this attractive, well-dressed young lady walk by. Who was that striking-looking girl, he asked his companion, who had tipped his hat to her. This gentleman, a friend of the Scott family, promptly arranged a dinner engagement for Edward to meet Florence that evening, and they were married 2 years later on June 24th, 1890. But Libby had a hard 2 years in business before his marriage. His company was doing poorly. Many who followed him from Boston went back home. He considered going back home himself. His dreams of the Golden West were souring. Near despair, he went to Wheeling, West Virginia, to recruit some new men. There, he made one of the most important decisions of his life. He hired Michael J. Owens, a fiery Irishman who was a genius at mechanizing glass-forming processes. "Mr. Libby," he said, "you'd better hire me. I'll make you a good man." Owens invented a series of glass-making machines which truly revolutionized the glass industry. The Owens bottle machine was just one way Owens made good on his promise to Mr. Libby. They were business partners and friends for 35 years. Libby began by producing handmade cut and blown glass. He later automated his operations and expanded his product lines to include lamp chimneys, electric light bulbs, and glass tubing, flat or sheet glass, chemical glassware, and glass-forming machinery. 4 years after his arrival in Toledo, the future of Libby Glass was looking better. The company made substantial profits on a contract for manufacturing large quantities of light bulbs. A reasonably secure future, however, was not good enough for Libby. He set his sights on the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. He wanted a grand Libby pavilion. He wanted visitors to his pavilion to watch the operation of an actual glass factory producing glassware. His company would produce a showpiece, a glass dress. His business associates said no, the company couldn't afford this display. But he was a promoter, an advertising genius, and a courageous man. He got the money he needed, about $250,000 in all. Then, Libby and his new bride spent a year in Chicago while he personally oversaw the construction of the Libby Pavilion. The fair opened, and people stayed away in droves. Libby was disappointed, but undaunted. Always the promoter, Libby began charging admission to the pavilion. Then he offered visitors one of the small novelty items the pavilion's glass factory was producing. The idea was a smash. The ladies loved the glass dress. Princess Eulalia of Spain ordered one just like it. After the fair, no fashionable woman wanted to be without Libby cut glassware in her home. It took a remarkable woman to agree to spend the first year of her marriage in the background during construction of her husband's World's Fair pavilion. Florence Scott was a member of a pioneering Toledo family. Her grandfather, Jessup Scott, was an early settler of the city. He acquired much valuable real estate, was a co-owner of the Toledo Blade, and a passionate believer in the future of Toledo. The Scott family donated the lands upon which the Toledo Museum of Art was to be built. The philanthropy of Edward Drummond and Florence Scott Libby is best exemplified by the Toledo Museum of Art. In 1901, men of the exclusive Tile Club, an arts interest group, had an idea. If Pittsburgh and Chicago could have art museums, why not Toledo? The Tile Club got Mr. Libby interested. Once again, Mr. Libby knew his man when he saw him. He persuaded George Stevens to become director of the museum, such as it was, in 1903. Housed first in the Gardner Building, and then in this frame building, the museum's first collection consisted of a painting of sheep, a table and some chairs, and a mummified cat. But George Stevens was not discouraged. Like Libby, he had the courage to dream on a grand scale. He used his amazing range of talents as actor, musician, speaker, poet, and magician to win support for the dream. Libby would match the funds George could raise from the community. Stevens campaigned tirelessly, and Edward Libby gave funds many times over his initial promise. George and Nina Stevens, Arthur Secor, the Libbys, and others dreamed of a palace of art. In 1912, the dream became a reality. The museum would be like a Greek temple, white, clean, streamlined. It would not be for adults only, like other museums of its day. Children were not only allowed, they were welcomed. They were encouraged to see, experience, learn, enjoy, and try to create for themselves if they wished. Free art and music education for children is just one of the gifts the Libbys helped give the people of Toledo. Edward Libby not only produced glass, he collected it as well, and then gave it to the museum. He donated many major works of art. He also bought the work of unknowns. He purchased George Bellows' Blackwell's Bridge long before Bellows achieved wide reputation. Mrs. Libby personally donated a charming Delftware collection and numerous Oriental art objects. In 1905, the Libbys became interested in Egypt. They traveled there in search of treasures they could bring back to the museum. The papyrus Libby was a rare find. It documented the reign of the pharaoh Kabasha and revealed the considerable power Egyptian royal women possessed over their husbands and their money. To this day, a large portion of all the acquisitions made by the Toledo Museum of Art are purchased through use of endowment funds bequested by Mr. and Mrs. Libby through their wills. The Libbys spent much of their time in travel abroad, in Italy, France, Germany, Switzerland, Holland, England, and elsewhere in Europe for business and for pleasure. They traveled in the United States as well, particularly in California. In 1917, the Libbys fell in love with the Ojai Valley area in California and built a winter retreat there. Mr. Libby, in typical fashion, decided the town of Ojai could use a few things: a Spanish-style shopping arcade, a post office, a public park with music amphitheater, a country club, and golf course. Their retreat in Ojai was Shangri-La for Florence and Edward. They possessed fullness of life. But in 1925, at age 72, Edward Drummond Libby suddenly contracted pneumonia and died within a few days. The city of Toledo mourned him. Flags flew at half-mast. Toledo had lost one of its finest citizens, a man who said he was proud to hail from Toledo. Florence Scott Libby lived in California until her death in 1938. She carried on the Libby tradition of giving. She had a great love of music and wanted the art museum to house not only visual art, but live musical performances as well. She also wanted to help ease the burden of unemployment in Toledo during the Depression years. So she gave the funds and directed that the peristyle be built. About 3,000 people were employed to complete this part of the museum in 1933. When she died in 1938, a memorial service was held for her in the peristyle. Edward Drummond Libby and Florence Scott Libby believed in giving of their wealth, of their time, in cultural and civic affairs, of their dreams for a more beautiful Toledo. The Libbys lived with a spirit of giving, and today, Toledo is richer for having known them.
Growth, evolution, equality. These are words by which Pauline Steinem lived. Her influence on Toledo's educational, philanthropic, and cultural concerns in the early years of this century has been indelibly etched into the fiber of the city and indeed the nation. A Polish immigrant, she came to Toledo in 1887 as the wife of a successful businessman, Joseph Steinem. As a mother, her interests were drawn to the educational system in Toledo, and as a woman, to the ongoing struggle for the equality of the sexes. In 1904, Mayor Samuel Golden Rule Jones, a close friend and supporter of the women's movement, issued Pauline Steinem a challenge to be the first woman in Toledo to run for election to the local Board of Education. A challenge which, though Jones never lived to see the outcome, resulted in significant changes in the attitudes of the city's residents. Steinem's problem with winning the election was twofold. As well as dealing with the day-to-day problems of conducting a political campaign of any kind, she was also faced with the formidable task of re-educating women to become conscientious voters. Her drive and determination paid off, however, and in 1905, after having swept nearly every precinct, Pauline Steinem took her seat as the first woman on the Toledo Board of Education. Though her duties on the school board demanded a great deal of her time, she never lost sight of the importance of the women's suffrage movement and remained active in the fight for equality. Armed with the support of her sisters in the movement, as well as some of the more liberal-minded and influential men at the time, men such as Mayor Brand Whitlock and previously Sam Jones, she eventually became president of the Ohio Women's Suffrage Association. She was one of 2 delegates chosen to represent the United States at the International Council of Women, held in Switzerland in 1908, and addressed both a United States Senate committee and the Ohio General Assembly on behalf of the rights of women. Because of her keen mind, dynamic personality, and ambition for the betterment of mankind, the work of Pauline Steinem has lived long and will continue to live for the benefit of all.
Some men are fortunate enough to receive recognition in 2 fields. Such was John Hardy Doyle, a respected attorney and jurist in Toledo's early years. He was also known as a prominent local historian. Doyle, who was admitted to the practice of law in 1865 at the age of 21, became a judge of the Court of Common Pleas in 1879. In 1883, Doyle became the youngest man to serve on the Ohio Supreme Court. It might have been that he was of an age that bridged a major transition in Toledo history that accounted for the fact that Doyle became known not only for his legal ability, but as a respected authority on northwestern Ohio history. Born in 1844, Doyle was to see Toledo grow from a community of 2,500 to a major city. He played along the banks of the old creek and canal beds in the very area where he later practiced law in the Spitzer Building and the Nicholas Building. This is the downtown area of Madison, Superior, and Huron when he was born, and this is the downtown shortly before he died. Judge Doyle organized the Historical Society of Northwestern Ohio and became its first president. He wrote the narrative history of the area in a book entitled A Story of Early Toledo. He also authored over 40 monographs on historical and literary topics. Doyle himself was a product of the Toledo public school system, which was created in 1849 when he was just 5 years old. He attended the city's first elementary school, LaGrange. John Doyle graduated from Toledo High School and went on to Denison University. He left the university in 1862 to enlist in the Ohio Infantry with a commission of second lieutenant. Doyle contracted typhoid fever and was discharged before seeing action. After recovering his health, and as was the custom for those who wished to be lawyers in these days, Doyle studied the law under Edward Bissell, a prominent Toledo attorney and landowner. Bissell is often credited with uniting the small communities of Port Lawrence and Vistula into the town of Toledo. By 1876, the population and the growth of the city was tremendous, and Doyle was well established in his legal practice. This old West End home was one of his residences of that era. Lucas County had been established only 9 years before Doyle was born, and on September 7, 1835, the first session of the Court of Common Pleas was held. It was merely for the purpose of recording Ohio's jurisdiction over the disputed Ohio-Michigan territory and lasted only 6 minutes. 6 months later, the court was in session on a regular basis. 34 years and about 9 judges later, John Doyle was elected as Common Pleas judge. By this time, the county courthouse had moved from Maumee, the county seat from 1842 to 1853, to the corner of Adams and Erie Streets, where a new courthouse was erected in 1853. It was from this building that Doyle presided. This picture was taken in 1894 and shows the new and present county courthouse under construction. The new courthouse was opened in 1897. Much of John Doyle's legacy is still with us today. The book he wrote is still to be found on the shelves of local libraries. His elegant home at the corner of Erie and Walnut Streets is thought to be Toledo's oldest existing residence, dating back to the city's antebellum period. Having fallen into disrepair since this picture was taken, its rehabilitation is currently underway. His law books are still intact, and the law firm John Doyle established in 1884 still bears his legacy and his name.
She was a woman of strong intellect, a force of character far beyond the ordinary, a brilliant writer on topics that engaged her attention, and she was an active participant in the affairs of the day.
This is what was said about Sarah Williams upon her death in 1902, and in light of all she accomplished during her 80 long years, this may have appeared to many of her friends to be an understatement. She was born in New Hampshire in 1822 and moved to Toledo with her husband when he took over proprietorship of the Toledo Blade in 1853. While her husband kept busy at the Blade, Mrs. Williams, a prolific writer and editor in her own right, became closely associated with numerous publications, including the popular Toledo Sunday Journal and the Ballot Box, a journal devoted to the cause of women's suffrage. In the 1850s, she took a keen interest in the growing fight for the rights of women. Though not aggressive in the physical sense, her stance became clear through persuasive discourse which appealed to the intellect rather than heated argument. Though she was a staunch supporter of the struggle for women's rights, her first opportunity for active service in the cause did not occur until 1869, when her close friends Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton visited Toledo for the purpose of rousing public support of the women's suffrage movement. Until that time, Mrs. Williams was a member of a rather loosely constructed band of enthusiastic women who supported the cause, but out of this visit and the public awareness it caused came the Toledo Women's Suffrage Association, with Sarah Williams, charter member and president. During the Civil War, she was active in the Union cause and volunteered her services as a nurse at the front. Closer to home, her concern for the less fortunate led her to be instrumental in founding of the Home for Friendless Women, known today 115 years later as the Sunset House. She was one of the original trustees of the Toledo University of Arts and Trades, and on April the 23rd, 1974, the 152nd anniversary of her birth, Sarah Williams's place in history was assured when the Ohio General Assembly passed a resolution to memorialize her for her outstanding contribution to the women's movement. And Sarah Williams, whose impression was deeply felt in the progress of her day, will remain permanently etched into the ever-turning pages of a Toledo scrapbook.
In the past century and a half, Toledo voters have demonstrated a willingness to send some unusual characters to high office. Foremost among them is Samuel Golden Rule Jones. While serving 4 terms as mayor, he changed the face of Toledo politics more than any other man. An immigrant from Wales, Jones made his fortune by developing a new steel rod that allowed oilmen to drill deeper wells. He moved to Toledo and established the Acme Sucker Rod Company on Seeger Avenue. It was 1894, a year of economic depression and unemployment. Faced with a stream of men begging for work, he wrote, quote, "The actual contact with ragged, starving men, willing and anxious to do any kind of work, did not square with any just conception of democracy and brotherhood," unquote. He proceeded to do everything in his power to create a world within the walls of his factory that would set an example for Toledo's citizens. Other factories had long lists of threatening rules, but Jones needed only one. It was inscribed on a plaque which hung over the plant entrance. The rule that governs this factory: "Therefore, whatsoever ye would that men should do unto you, do ye even so unto them." He personally practiced the rule with programs for his employees that were far ahead of their time: a living wage, an 8-hour workday, paid vacations, company insurance plans, and profit sharing. He built a park, a playground, and a workers' hall near his factory. He even recruited factory workers for a Golden Rule band and a singing group. Golden Rule Jones was soon admired and respected throughout Toledo. In 1897, the Republican Party was badly split on a nominee for mayor. When they finally turned to Jones as a compromise candidate, he easily won the election. But Jones could not abide by the patronage system and refused to fire good workers in order to fill City Hall jobs with party members. He won 3 more elections as an independent, even though he was vigorously opposed by both parties, the clergy, and every newspaper in town. His radical policies, such as repealing Sunday blue laws and his defense of the rights of prostitutes, drunkards, gamblers, and petty criminals, whom he called the victims of society, hardly made him popular among the Toledo establishment. Nor did his attempts to bring all industries under public ownership, his encouragement of unions, and his conviction to improve the rights and living conditions of the poor. Jones brought many lasting and admirable improvements to the city and constantly promoted good health, exercise, and wholesome recreation. He and his equally high-minded assistants oversaw the development of a park system, expanded the Toledo Zoological Gardens, and supported the building of one of the first public golf courses in the nation, now the Ottawa Park Municipal Golf Course. They also fought with some success to establish kindergartens in the schools and playground facilities throughout the city, their first and last priority always to improve the standard of living for all Toledoans. Samuel Golden Rule Jones died in office in 1904 at the age of 57. Some 50,000 people filed past his open casket. Pickpockets and prostitutes, factory workers, businessmen, and politicians all came to pay tribute to a man who changed significantly the politics and appearance of Toledo, and most importantly, created respect and a sense of self-worth among its citizens.
The presentation of Toledo Stories is made possible in part by Key Bank, celebrating the strength of our region's history and supporting the promise of its future. Key Bank, achieve anything.